Welcome to Belmont Poetry Night. I'm Monica Korde, your host and the Poet Laureate of Belmont, California. We meet on the third Tuesdays of every month to celebrate the spoken word as makers, listeners, and admirers of poetry. We come with featured guests and an open mic inviting readers of all ages. After gathering for several years at our favorite physical venue, the Belmont Library, since the pandemic, our thriving poetry circle has transitioned to this virtual space, and I'm grateful it allows me to welcome poets and listeners from across the globe. Fantastic to see everyone here. Hard to believe that summer is over and the season of fall is upon us, right? Well, I hope you had a luxuriant summer and that you are noticing the slowly changing colors around you. And now that you're well versed with our poetry night tradition, please share in the chat which part of the world you are joining me from, or which part of the Bay Area you are joining me from. And wherever it is you may be, thanks for joining me and zooming in. Moving on, as you know, the Latinx Heritage Month is officially here, observed from September 15th to October 15th each year. And we celebrated it on the Poetry Night last year as well. But given that our Bay Area is thriving with a large community of Hispanic and Chicano poets, my intention towards revisiting this Heritage Month and curating this Poetry Night was to spotlight the artistic and the cultural gifts they possess. So keeping this in mind, tonight we'll be celebrating it under the theme of Cultura y Corazón, delving into the rich cultural tapestry and into the hearts, the corazón of the Hispanic, Latino, Chicano communities, honoring their ancestors, histories, diverse voices, and their vibrant stories told in poetry and in art. Here's a poem to start with by Mexican-American poet, educator, and performer Jose Olivares. What I loved about this poem when I came upon it first was the interplay between the fluidity of language with which the poet writes, and yet the struggle of experience and emotion he experiences between those lines. By Jose Olivares, this piece is titled Poem Where No One is Deported. Now I like to imagine La Migra running into the sock factory where my mom and her friends worked. It was all women who worked there. Women who braided each other's hair during breaks. Women who wore rosaries and never had hair out of place. Women who were ready for cameras or for God. Who ended all their sentences with "Si Dios quiere," as in the day before the immigration raid, when the rumor of a raid was passed around like bread, and the women made plans. Si Dios quiere. So when the immigration officers arrived, they found boxes of socks and all the women absent, safe at home. Those officers thought no one was working. They were wrong. The women would say it was God working. And it was God. But the God my mom taught us to fear was vengeful. He might have wet his thumb and wiped La Migra out of this world like a smudge on a mirror. This God was the God that woke me up at 7 a.m. every day for school to let me know there was food in the fridge for me and my brothers. I never asked my mom where the food came from, but she told me anyway. Gracias a Dios. Gracias a Dios del chisme, who heard all La Migra's plans and whispered them into the right ears to keep our families safe. Thank you. Jose Olivares is from Chicago, author of his debut book of poems, Citizen Illegal. You might have heard of him already or read about him. A son of Mexican immigrants, he says that although he tries to talk to his parents about his experiences, it is a difficult conversation between them. So his poetry is an attempt to make that reach out to them. For Olivares, poetry became the art form where he was given permission to tell his own story and to investigate his own life. This reaching out, this element of exploration of the self, is what I also noticed is captured artistically and bravely by another poet we have with us tonight. I am so pleased to welcome my featured poet and artist for this month, Elizabeth Jiménez Montelongo, a multi-talented artist. Her accomplishments are many, and I'd like to revisit her bio with all of you listening. Elizabeth Jiménez Montelongo is a visual artist, poet, and facilitator. Elizabeth's work is informed by her indigenous ancestry, Mesoamerican philosophy, Mexica and Mixtec art, Mexican culture, Chicano history, and her experiences as a woman. Her paintings and sculptures have been exhibited across the United States, and her poetry is published widely, including in the anthologies Nos Pasamos de la Raya, We Crossed the Line, Cesura, Ascent, Descent, Azares, and in the Harvard's Latinx literary publication Palabritas. Elizabeth's work also appears in the online journals such as Label Me Latina and in print journals such as Red Wheelbarrow Literary Magazine. She facilitates community poetry workshop series, Palabras and Poetry, and I Am Woman, to encourage writing that supports self-reflection, healing, and empowerment. Elizabeth is co-editor of the inaugural 2020 issue of Culture Counts magazine by Culture Counts reading series of San Jose State University. She was 2021 Creative Ambassador of the San Jose Office of Cultural Affairs, and she's a member of the Board of Directors of Poetry Center San Jose, where she hosts Cultura Poetry Night. Elizabeth is the director and editor of Laurie's magazine, and you can visit and read all about her and so much more that she has achieved and she does on her website, which is www.ejmontelongo.com. Bienvenida, Elizabeth. Me alegro de verte. ¿Cómo estás?
Bien, gracias. Gracias, Mónica. Me da gusto verte y me da mucho gusto estar aquí con ustedes.
All right. So whenever you are ready to take us off.
Sure. Yeah, good evening, everyone. Really glad to be here with all of you today. And I have about 6 or 7 poems to share with you, and guess Monica will stop me in between after every few. So the first one I'd like to share is called Stereotype Me Sometime. And this poem is about taking stereotypes and labels as an opportunity for empowerment. Stereotype me sometime. Sometimes I'm a Chicana and a Chongo with bright blue nails, darkened eyebrows, big earrings, chanclas. A veces I'm a hardworking Mexicana, looking all sweaty and tired in my worn-out jeans and mis tenis y mi trenza. Also, I'm that spicy Latina you dream about, though you'll never admit it. Red lipstick smile and a dress. De repente, I'm a prissy, oh so educated Latina, being aggressive and combative, so disagreeable, so defiant. Then again, I'm a sweet, smart, indigenous woman, gentle, graceful, minding those manners, even when you call me Hispanic. I'll snap at you, scowl at you, seduce you, school you, soothe you. So sassy and sweaty, so sexy and sweet, so subversive, scandalous. All right, next poem is about loyalty, commitment, and food. It's called I Pledge Allegiance to Chicharrones. I pledge allegiance to chicharrones, the ones with chile y limon, the crunchy ones, and especially the ones con carne. I solemnly swear to support and defend churros, the ones filled with cajeta, chocolate, or mermelada de fresa. I take you, tamales, to have and to hold, always received with your hoja intact. I promise to love you, caldo de pollo, in sickness and in health. I will love and cherish you, tortillas, redonda, amarilla tortilla, until death do us part. I will serve and protect you, mole, so that you never burn as I stir. I hereby affirm that tacos, unlike flautas, must never ever be frozen, that enchiladas are not the same thing as burritos drenched in salsa, that true tortas must include aguacate queso fresco, or at least a jalapeño. I believe in 3 types of pozole, verde, rojo, y blanco, best made with maíz nixtamalizado. Yo juro que he comido sopes con frijoles, enfrijoladas, tacos de frijoles, tostadas de frijoles, gorditas de frijoles, pupusas de frijoles y corundas, rellenas de frijoles, por supuesto. I pledge to eat every camarón in the cóctel to the best of my ability. I hereby declare that I absolutely, entirely eat huge quesadillas de carne asada, washed down with agua de piña, horchata, agua de Jamaica, o agua de tamarindo. I promise to love and obey the urge to eat gorditas de milanesa con salsa. I will do my best to do my duty to my plato and my panza, and to los dientes de mis descendientes. Provecho. Thank you for listening to those.
Fantastic, Elizabeth. What amazing opening. Both the poems that you opened with I see that they are a true celebration of the self and the heritage that you carry. And I love some of the repetitions that come through and echo through those pieces where you say, I am, and you show who you are and who you're not. And the second poem that you shared, I pledge allegiance to Chicharrones, pardon my pronunciation, but I think both of these hold so much warmth as well as tenderness in them. And the sense of identity comes across strong in these poems. In your following poems as well, I'm sure we'll be hearing that. They reflect a sense of empowerment and self-awareness. And I was reading an interview by Chicana author and playwright Denise Chavez, who talks about being a Chicana, and I quote her, Chicanismo to me is a consciousness. When I take on that Chicano stance, as I call it, I take on an awareness and a sensitivity and a commitment to issues, and that is bound in my cultural rootedness to the earth. And I see that, I notice that you prefer the term Chicana or Chicana as opposed to Latina or Hispanic. For people that are not familiar with these terms, what is the difference, and what made you gravitate towards the term Chicana, and how has it influenced your poetry?
All right, thanks for the question. So yes, I do prefer to identify as Chicana. I'll try to keep it short. So the terms Latino and Hispanic both focus on the Spanish language, right? Like Hispanic comes from like Espanol, Spain, and the term Latin also, or Latino, also focuses on the Latin roots of the Spanish language. And first of all, like Spanish is not the native language of this continent. When I say continent, I mean like the two-part American continent, North America, South America, the Caribbean islands. But so like the focus on Spanish, first of all, is like problematic because most of the people on this continent, well, all the people on this continent were indigenous right before the arrival of Spaniards, and then the English and French that colonized the whole continent. And so calling ourselves by a language that was imposed on our people, or calling ourselves by a term that's based on a language that isn't even like, our ancestral language, is very, well, it's like, they're Eurocentric terms. And so if we just like use those for ourselves, then we're just kind of focusing on maybe European ancestry that we may or may not have, or allowing other people to label us as if we even had like European ancestry, just based on a language that was imposed and that, people speak now because our ancestors were forced to, basically. And I guess so your question had a few parts. So why I choose the term Chicana is because I used to actually identify just as Mexican growing up. My family would tell me like you're Mexican, you are, I was born in the United States, but they tell me like you're American, but you're Mexican, like that's your culture, we're your family, we're Mexican, so you're Mexican. And it's true, and that's what I tell my daughter. And so at some point, I heard the terms like Mexican American a lot, and I was kind of like, okay, kind of okay with that. But when I heard about the Chicano movement, which isn't something that was actually even mentioned, and I know because I would have remembered, but all throughout my public school education, the Chicano movement was never mentioned. And this was like a big deal during the whole time of civil rights movement. And I never heard of it until college, unfortunately, which is the case for a lot of us Chicana peoples. And so when I learned about like the history of people from what is now Mexico in this country, and like why a lot of my experiences growing up and with my family and the things I'd see, and people in my community, like it just made sense, like knowing like history of it, and then seeing that during the Chicano movement, people took on this term that was originally it was like an insult, like a slur, to be called Chicano, like you're not fully Mexican. But people like appropriated this term and were proud of it, and like this is where the history of like calling yourself Chicano, the Chicano movement. So it's something that's very like aware of history, aware of our indigenous roots, which is very important to me, and aware of like how our communities are affected by all these basically racist social systems that determine the like economic, social class that a lot of us are in. The languages we are able to speak or are expected to speak, and the way our children are educated, or we are educated if we grew up in this country. So there's a lot to it, and that's why I do like the term Chicana, but I also do identify as Mexican and as Indigenous. And that's all kind of wrapped in there, but I like to separate it out because I realized, unfortunately, a lot of people have started, or it seems to me like when people know that, a certain community is Mexican, or that I personally am Mexican and they still call me Latina, I feel like people have come to associate calling someone Mexican like if it were an insult, and it's not an insult. Like, that's our culture. For some of us, it's our nationality. And, just because there has been all this racism around Mexicans and Mexican people, it doesn't mean that, that nobody's Mexican all of a sudden. Like, like there are a lot of us from, from Mexico, and there's people from, all the countries in Central America. But, if we're Mexican, and it's okay to say that. So yeah, I like to use all those terms for myself and not Latina or Hispanic.
Well, thank you so much, Elizabeth, for elaborating on that. And I'm so glad that you were the one who actually let me know that there are some questions when I was asking you what are the questions you would like to talk about and respond to, which people usually don't ask you. And this was one of them. And I'm really glad that you opened up to asking this question and responding to this question, because I think these are very important questions. The general public, I think, would be a little bit hesitant to ask directly. And through this conversation, I'm glad that we are getting to know some insightful things and learning new things about the culture that we are surrounded by, all through wherever we, whatever profession we are in, as well as in our everyday lives as well, while we are living in America. So I think it's so important to understand all identities. And one of the parts in my question was also, do you feel, or how has the Chicana identity influenced your poetry?
Well, I think most of the poetry I write, or at least a lot of it, and especially the poetry that I enjoy sharing publicly, or that I think is most important to share publicly, is based on my perspectives as a Chicana and my experiences as a Chicana. And besides, like when I mentioned that I learned some of like the history of Mexicans and Chicanos in the United States during college, like I learned that because I went looking for it. Like I knew something was missing, like things don't all make sense, and so I see like courses that were about people that I consider like like my people culturally. So I like sought that out, and um so I learned a lot there, but I continue to like educate myself by like reading, like just being in community with people in different ways, and all of that. Like it means a lot to me, and it's important to me like to know and to also be able to talk about it with people, which is why I put all that into my poetry, because when I share, especially in spaces that are mostly like Chicana or Raza peoples, which is a term that for now I prefer to use instead of like Latina or Hispanic as like an umbrella term. But if it's all like mostly Chicana peoples or Raza, and I share these poems, like people relate to them, they connect with them. A lot of people like, they have these thoughts and feelings, and they might not have put words to them. And so that's why I write them and share them. And also, yeah, for our next generations, that sometimes like, like you don't really feel um I have this other poem that I'm not sharing today, but like sometimes like it's almost as if you don't exist when you see all this like um all these like books and stories and songs that you learn in public schools, and everything's in English. It's about certain kind of people, and you never see anything that like connects with you or your family or your experiences. And so it almost feels like you're not real. And so I write and share it on these themes for also for like the younger generations, like my own daughter who's 8, and other like children and youth that want to see that and hear that, and feel like they're part of like a larger community, which they are, and that their experiences also like matter and are worth writing about and hearing about.
Well, I'm sure, Elizabeth, your words and as well as your art is contributing so much to our future generation as well as the present, and adding meaning behind all the labels that are heavy and are carried by the community. But thank you so much for sharing all of that. If you'd like to share your next couple of poems and then take another question, that'll be great.
Right. All right. So my next poem is it's about being called an immigrant on one's own native lands. And it also kind of relates to that poem that you opened with. by Jose Olivares, which are like, the theme of immigration and immigrants. It's called It Is I, the Immigrant. It is I, the immigrant, arrived on this side of the continent 13,000 years ago, returned over 3 decades ago, one cell smuggled in my mother's ovary as she crossed the border. It is I, the immigrant, who took your spot at that school, paid with the taxes taken from my parents' paychecks, paid with the property taxes charged quietly in the rent bills. It is I, the immigrant, who took your spot at that university, who swiped the degrees, who took off with the debt of education for the opportunity to snatch up the better underpaid jobs. It is I, the immigrant, who took your languages, added them to her own, who took back her native language because words are more powerful than spilled blood. It is I, the immigrant, unrepentant breeder of 7 sons, who commit the crimes of demanding justice, murdering indifference, trafficking awareness. It is I, the immigrant, returning home. Right. Next poem. Thank you. The next poem is about languages we speak, languages we're forced to speak, indigenous languages we readopt in the struggle against assimilation. Tacos de lenguas. Tacos de lengua you force-fed me, and now I can waggle my double-edged tongue right back, a flinty, sparky weapon, electric currents right into my pen, writing to you words held in for 500 years. From the genes in my blood to the genes that spill my blood. Y aquí en este banquete de tacos y lenguas y tacos de lengua, una gran reunión de pedernal, fuego, sangre, historia. Here I speak words that burn, that spark, fires that spread, fires that burn, bonfires, fires that burn out, fires that leave ashes, ashes to cover my body in, ashes to weep in, creating rivers of ink that tattoo the body, that tattoo the soul. Ashes to fertilize the roots, roots and ashes find other roots, roots that move, roots that shake, roots that rattle the ground, a ground of ashes under which lie bones, bones that won't lie still. I saw them rise and connect. I saw the skeleton come together, dancing skeleton, dancing with the corn plant, madre maíz, and neither had roots. Holding hands, no triangle, a circle, cycling, spinning, up into the air, chose to stay here, return to earth, feet on the ground, roots in the earth, roots in the ashes, on the bones that won't lie still. Rising from the ashes, rise from the ashes. I rose from the ashes, ashes to ashes, ashes on my forehead, ashes in a cross burned to ashes. They painted on my nopal, and I'm going to strike this lengua on another. Ay, que chispa. Ashes, ashes, but I refuse to fall down, even when I'm 6 feet underground. And mira como le hago. I am a lengua that you label me with. I am my thoughts that I nodded to. I am the palabras you all shoved in my mouth, but I spit them out in a different order. And I order them to emerge, spill in chispas, run in ashes and tears. And from there, where my 2 brown feet are planted, emerges a quetzali phoenix with a long coiled body that rises into the air. Feathers, maíz, and white flowers, que llueva. Into rivers and lakes and underground, into oceans and humidity, sips of lágrimas to lágrimas, tears to tears, que llueva. And may the plants grow strong. Thank you.
Oh, that was powerful, Elizabeth. You were really on fire with both those poems, and the lines which have stayed with me. I can waggle my double-edged tongue right back, and the next one that followed in the concluding stanzas. I am the palabras that you shoved in my mouth. And I see people in the chat, they have been mentioning lines that have resonated with them as well. I see Finbel completing that line that I just said. I spit them out in a different order. What a strong metaphor, as well as such a sharp imagery. I love the imagery that both your poems carried in their. What I wanted to look at now is going back to again another icon from Chicano literature, Cherry Moraga, a writer, feminist, advocate, poet, essayist, playwright, as well as a cultural activist, who said that culture is not a static entity. It is not romantic. It is always en lucha, always in a fight, a struggle. And your poems honor the Mexican culture, your heritage, and represent the social media around you. Your writing, I see, engages in activism with poems like It Is I, the Immigrant, Tacos de Lenguas, that you just read for us. Being a poet, a painter, and a facilitator, working in multiple disciplines, what is your current view as an activist poet? And has it changed at all?
Well, thanks for the question, and I really appreciate all the comments in the chat. I hadn't seen all of them, but I appreciate the support. I'll go back and look at those later. So as for your question, I don't necessarily consider myself an activist, or an activist poet. I know that like my poetry and my art in some ways, in certain ways, like serves the purpose um of activism. Um, but yeah, my intention with my poetry is just, to write it from like a very like my most just authentic, like, like thoughts and feelings. And yeah, and share it out. And with my artwork really centers my Indigenous heritage. As you'll see later on when we show some of my art. But I I paint those images of like Mexica, also known as Aztec dancers, because that's, it's part of my heritage and something that really makes me well, something that first really made me feel proud to have Indigenous heritage, especially, like realizing at a time when I grew up not really acknowledging my Indigenous heritage, because it's not something that, a lot of families talk about, in some cases. And so I didn't really realize that until I was, you know, um, yeah, around like my college years. And so like my artwork, it's either Mexica dancers from the Bay Area, or it has a lot of images. Like another series of my work has a lot of images of um, like Nahuatl glyphs from Mesoamerican books known as codices, the few remaining authentic ones. And I use that imagery because I just connect with it. Like I didn't set out trying to like be an activist or like showcase my culture or like, be different or something. It's just that like that's what gets my attention. Like the dancers get my attention, and the symbols in Indigenous books like really just like, I don't know, it called to me, it drew me in. And so that's, one of the ways like I want to express myself. It's like a visual language in which I express myself.
I really like that answer, Elizabeth. I remember we spoke about this very briefly, that there isn't something being done to showcase something specifically, but it really comes from your authentic being and how you feel and what you are a part of, where you come from, all of that. Let's go ahead and pull up your paintings, since we are talking about it. I think it would make a lot of sense for letting our audience to have a view of them while you can share more about those specific paintings that you've shared. So give me a moment and I'll just share my screen. All right, there we are. I like how you also let us know that your artwork centers on your Indigenous heritage, but I also see that it encompasses so much of who you are and how you think about your culture and your heritage. Uh, Going to our first slide here. which is a series of paintings. I'll just read the note aloud to everyone that is mentioned on the top of the page here. So this is the euphoric dance of the unconquered mind. The series is titled as that, which features textured oil paintings of Mexica dancers that exude movement, energy, and power to celebrate the continued tradition of indigenous dance ceremony. And you can see three paintings here, Sangre y Luz, Celestial, and Grief and Power. Elizabeth, if you would like to share thoughts on these or the process of making these paintings.
Sure. So, as mentioned, this is a euphoric dance of the unconquered mind. Mexica dancers from the Bay Area, and the indigenous culture. Mexica is, and the Mexica, I was just going to share the Mexica. When they first started to travel south from the area that's now the Southwest United States, they were called Aztec. But when they arrived in central Mexico and settled there, which would later became the Mexica Empire, I guess, or it's known as the Aztec Empire, like it spread out and also did, like colonize nearby indigenous peoples of other cultures. At that point they were called the Mexica. And I just like to mention this because like that was the name used for hundreds of years, and then at some point somebody wrote, and I think it was like within the last in the last 100 years only, somebody wrote a book, an anthropologist, and named it something Aztec. And so, people started like referencing that book, and people started calling the Mexica Aztec, and so that's the name they're known by. And so these like the Mexica people speak Nahuatl, and now like existing descendants in Mexico are like also referred to as Nahuatl people. So I don't think people some people might refer to themselves as Mexica, but it's like Nahuatl people, so Nahuatl speaking people. And so back to the paintings, like the dancers, I thought when I first saw this, I was about probably like 18 years old, 19. And I just love the energy of the dance. Like, I don't know if I'm sure some of you in the audience have seen the dancers live, but it's a very sensory experience. There's all the color of the headdresses and the regalia, and then there's the sound of the drums, which is really like loud and like fast beats, like fast and slow, and the ankle rattles. And then like the movements are quick. There's always incense being burned, so you can like smell it, you can see it in the air. And it's just everything. And so like that had an impact on me when I saw this, and I just like felt that energy like within myself witnessing this. And so I wanted to paint it, like make a painting. And so I had already taken photographs at some point before deciding to paint, but I decided to paint the dancers. And so I'd paint in oil. I paint these in oil paint on canvas with a knife, like a palette knife, instead of using brushes. And that way I'm just able to like spread the paint out more spontaneously, like quick spontaneous strokes of the palette knife to create these paintings. And they're very, very textured. You can tell a little bit, but up close in real life, you can see like very thick and pastel texture. And I've continued to create these and share them, as also like labeled in the title. It's just a symbol of how, like people will say that indigenous people were conquered, but our culture is still alive. People are still alive. They're actually like over a million. I don't have the exact numbers, but over a million Nahuatl speakers still in Mexico, and there are so many communities in Mexico that don't even speak Spanish. Like they still speak their indigenous languages, various indigenous languages. And so to me, like the dances represent all that, like these people that have been like erased, overlooked, that a lot of us don't even realize like they're still there and we're still here. And so these dances have been like they they're still practiced. The dancers at the time of the colonization by the Spaniards, it would be punished like violently, like they would maim them for practicing the dances. And enough people thought this was important enough that they would go to like remote locations or hide out wherever they could to continue this practice. And so it has survived like over 500 years, and it's even here across the border from where it originated. And it's also like these dances are they have a lot of points in common with indigenous dances from all over the continent. So I think of all that when I see the dancers. And I've also like danced a serious like committed dancer, but I have danced in the ceremonies and I paid them, and I think of all these things. And so that's why something that's really important to me, and I like to um I don't know, take part in it by representing it like visually and being able to exhibit these paintings in different locations with people that either like connect with it, or they are dancers, or they're like learning more about their indigenous heritage, or just people in general that haven't seen the dancers or heard any of like the history and um, current presence of indigenous peoples. And so it brings up important conversations. So that's why I continue to paint them.
Yeah, absolutely. It does. I think bringing up conversations in general, I think, is what art should always do, and it inspires all of us. These are absolutely exquisite and so vibrant and rich. I'm sure all of you are taking in the rich colors that are coming through, and we can only see them on the screen right now, but I'm sure in person on a canvas they would be even more amazing and magnificent. Moving on to the next slide, Elizabeth, these paintings are completely different from the ones we just saw. This is the Transformation series of paintings that explore identity, self-transformation, and empowerment. The compositions celebrate balance, the creative power of unity, and the healing potential of human connection. And I see that these are so unique in the way they are done, as well as the story each one of them is telling. And I remember from one of our conversations, Elizabeth, that you very strongly also communicate and express uh, experiences related with being a Mexican American woman or a Chicana in these paintings as well. And I see a lot of images of women, the feminist images coming through. Please talk a little bit about it, and then I have a question for you as well.
Okay. Thank you. So I'll just share a little bit about each of the paintings. So the one on the right, moving on, the one with the rainbow, I'm not sure how easy it is for people to see on the screen. Like these kind of paintings that I make, like they have a lot more detail than the other ones,
Yeah.
where they're best seen up close. But in case you can't see, I'll kind of describe a little bit. So there's a woman in the front, and a series of children like getting younger and younger, including a little baby at the very end being like carried in a little hammock kind of bed.
Yeah.
And so they're crossing over this rainbow. And at the bottom, you can see a cactus to represent Mexico, or country south of the border where cactuses grow. There's barbed wire behind it, so that's like a reference to borders and all the issues around like the idea of migration that's, created by the fact that there are these governments and they put up borders and then decide who can come in and who can't. And then like criminalize people for moving around the continent, which is something that people have done for like tens of thousands of years on these lands. And so that's what this painting references. The owl at the top in front of the moon symbolizes ancestors. The tree, which appears in some of my paintings in the series, it's just like the four directions, four elements. Always, a series of four. There's a little symbol in the middle of it that represents transformation movement. And then on the left, the little like red part with the steps, it's a teocalli, so what people call like pyramids. I don't know, a few places in Mexico and also in Central America and South America. I guess they're like also called stepped pyramids in English. So in Nahuatl, it's a teocalli. So it's like a place, like an enclosure of energy. And so they're headed that way. So this is like about culture, identity, and heritage, and how that, like, it's a step on the path to like overcoming all these issues of
Yeah, it's beautiful
borders.
when you take us through the details in there. It's so intricate, and even the other two paintings, Birth of a Chicana and I Am Guadalupe, I see a lot of small details in there as well. And I especially love the contrast in the colors that you use in comparison to the euphoric dance painting series that we just saw, and these that we see here. My question to you, Elizabeth, is I was following another visual artist, a Chicano visual artist and poet, Maceo Montoya, who explains that his visual and written creations stem from seeking and going after the same impulse. Since he writes poetry as well as does the artwork, he talks about the same impulse that takes him through. For you, what is that impulse that forms a special bond between the visual and the words that you create, particularly when it comes to, as you mentioned, navigating themes of identity, culture, and social issues as a Mexican American artist?
Well, thanks for the question. Sometimes I feel like there's not a big connection between some of my artwork and my poetry. Um, like with the previous series that you showed, the euphoric dance of the unconquered mind. But I do realize, and with these paintings there is, but I do realize like at the, I guess is like, yeah, the like culture, identity, and social issues that affect people that share like my culture and identity. And um I guess that's what connects everything, and like, and gives me like a passion for it, because I care about, like the like the aspects of my culture that I enjoy and appreciate, like we mentioned, like the food, or like the dancing, the art, but also, like I care about people. And so, whatever is gonna be like good for people, if it's like sharing an image that's like positive or empowering, or just, like representing like these issues, or helping, envision like a better path forward um for communities, like whatever it is that could be positive, that makes me want to continue sharing this work. Um, Otherwise, I would probably still make it, but not share it. But yeah. But I was gonna mention real quick, and then we're probably gonna move to the poetry. But
Yeah.
piece in the middle, I just wanted to mention the eagle's wings that are sticking out. Oh, in the
Oh, in the
yeah,
center, the painting in the center.
the center one. So the eagle's wings, that's from the W flag, the UFW flag. So it's the one
I
that
see.
is carried like by, it's the United Farm Workers. So when they did like the protests, and like, so the Cesar Chavez organized, and all the farm workers,
Mm.
that was the flag. And so Chicanos also, like display and appreciate that flag and like understand the history of it. So that's why I put that there. And then on the left, it's supposed to reference the Virgen de Guadalupe, so the Virgin Mary, the way she's shown a lot in Mexico with the like glow behind her, but in a different version where it's all about corn. And yeah, the corners, it shows like a series of like planting the corn and growing it and little child that's born at the same time.
Wow, I could keep listening to you, Elizabeth, because there are so many small little stories woven into each of the little details that you've done on the paintings, and I think it is an entire separate conversation to have just about your artwork, and I'm sure you do that as well. But let's move on to the final slide we have here of the Footless Dancers series. A collection of 13 paintings, out of which we have 3 of those here, of Mexica dancers paired with verses of Elizabeth's poem, Footless Dancers, which she'll be presenting with us shortly. This series celebrates the survival of a history of violence and continued aggression through inaccurate versions of history and misrepresentation. Elizabeth, if you'd like to share the poems or speak a little bit about the paintings, anything is fine. Or let the poems do the talk.
Yeah, I'll let the poetry do the talking. But yeah,
Okay.
the whole series of 13 paintings has the whole poem on it. Looking for more opportunities to exhibit the series in the Bay Area. So here's a poem, Footless Dancers. Why do you claim we ripped each other's hearts out? It was you who tried to rip ours out. But when you reached in to grip them, we had already hidden them. So you took our feet, our hands, our tongues, you took our heads. Only our hearts remained. The blood flowed, but it flowed from the tips of the sharpened crosses you drove into our lives. You dipped them, still dripping blood, into ink, and wrote lies to hide your evil deeds. We planted your crosses, planted our flowers around them, tied green leaves to the tips. Now, as we dance without feet, as we pound drums without hands, as we sing our songs without tongues, and even without heads, remember the wisdom of our ancestors. We wash away your inks with the condensation of our turquoise songs, and burn your lies with the fire in our hearts. We will be whole again. You will share with us your feet, your replace what you took from us. We will be whole again. We will become the moon, and the walking waters will turn their heads and know the truth. We will be whole again. We will share with you our hearts, wash the blood and ink from your palms, and as you are finally able to see us with your eyes closed, you will know that we are one. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Do you have another of the poems to share as well?
I do. I'm not sure how much longer you'd like me to take up. I had 2.
Would you like to read one more and maybe share the last one at the end of the open mic?
Sure. Okay. All right.
Thank you.
I was just choosing which one. All right, Últimas Scars. And I included this one because I think you encouraged me to, right? All right, Últimas Scars. Las últimas scars to fade are in the mind and DNA. Mindless traditions, repetitions are not my way. Cortaron my manos, yet they are recreating. Cosas that you've never seen, pero vas a ver, keep waiting. Cortaron my lenguas, but I grew back a few más. I'm planting a garden, scatter seeds as I pass. For each libro burned, escribo 10 más hoy. Write them with an ink they cannot destroy. Wisdom, conocimiento on a stone engraving. That wasn't the end. No, that was the beginning. Ancestors in my sangre, whispering through my corazón. Painting con manos antiguas, writing palabras con razón. My ancestors viviendo en mí son los que estás viendo. Paintings, poems, songs, and danzas. In my sangre are corriendo. Demolish a city, a person, but nunca a nation. Dormidos but waking after each assassination. Despierta in my arms with a message for our gente. Despierta in my feet, images clear the mente. Wake up my minds and lenguas, learn it, speak it, read it. Despierta in my hearts, create and grow and don't quit. Vivimos in the ruins, but our hearts are the vines. Conditioning is veneno, our creations free minds. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Just wonderful to see how the poems connect with the visual as well that we see here. I'll go ahead and close the slide now, but I do have one final question that we see that you are a painter and a poet, but you are also a community builder. And when the pandemic started, you came up with a new vision as the founder and editor of La Raíz magazine that renders Latino, Chicano people, women, BIPOC, and many more creative voices into visibility. Despite the numbers, what would you like to see in the literary arts industry to further include and better represent Latinx writers' voices and their stories?
Well, I think it would be great to see more publications, like more literary journals, anthologies, and just books by our people published, and for there not to be so many restrictions on the languages that we choose to express ourselves in. I've been part of, or I've had work published in anthologies that are they have like translated versions of the poetry right in the anthologies, and some that just they just leave it in Spanish or leave it in English or it's in Spanglish, just the way we wrote it, the way it came out, and like that's okay. And that's how La Raíz magazine is. People can write and share it in English, Spanish, or Spanglish, or even have words in other languages. And they don't have to translate it or put or italicize. No italics. They don't have to put like a footnote or an endnote or anything. It's just it's just there. That's how it is. And if people are curious like what something means, like most of us have access to Google, or you can ask somebody. And so I'd hope there are more opportunities like that. And also, I'm just gonna say it's really disappointing to see all these like what is it called? Equity, diversity and inclusion initiatives and efforts that are really just like tokenizing people, like, oh, we included like this or that person because it's a person of color, or because it's a woman, and it doesn't really like make a big impact. Like you can tell when you read a publication or you look at their websites, that they're mainly only publishing like Euro Americans, white Americans, and not anybody else really, except for like one or two here and there, or especially during like Heritage Months or something, just so that they can look good. And it's really obvious. And so I would hope that there's like a real effort to like integrate those like publishing and literary spaces where they're like inclusive of people, and show a variety of expressions so that people can like hear from each other. And I'll mention like in La Raíz magazine, it does focus on global majority, also known as people of color. It focuses on women, and it focuses on indigenous peoples from like Mexico, Central America, South America, Caribbean. But it's open to everybody, and that creates opportunities for like people to like cross-cultural spaces, like readings, cross-cultural understanding, because people will read each other's work if they're both published in it, and not say like, oh, that's like a Mexican publication and I'm not Mexican, so I'm not going to read it. Like that's what ends up happening. So yeah, more integration in the literary world would be nice.
I think it makes so much sense, all that you just shared with us, Elizabeth. And thank you so much for being so honest and so authentic in sharing your thoughts and all the experiences that you've had working with the community on different levels and through different creations. Once again, thank you so much for all the offerings. A truly arty evening steeped in the beauty of your poetry and visual artwork. And it was a joy to get to know you through your work tonight. But I personally admire the sensitive vision with which you approach both these artistic forms, each so vibrant and unique in their presentation. Thanks a lot for sharing them, for honoring the arts as well as the ancestors through your creations, and for being here tonight. This poetry night was Cultura y Corazón in every sense. And I'm so thrilled about it.
Thank you so much, Monica. It's a real honor to be invited, and I think it's a responsibility to be invited to represent my culture. And so yeah, thank you so much, and thank you to everyone that listening to my poetry and we talk about my artwork and my responses to the questions about identity and everything. I appreciate your attention to that.
Well, I'm sure everybody is just as excited to listen to you and hear all that you had to say, as well as witness your artwork. Before we go ahead with our open mic segment, we have a couple minutes, and I'll open the floor up briefly for any appreciative comments that you may have for Elizabeth. And I would encourage you to unmute yourselves and talk to Elizabeth. I have posted her websites in the chat with information on her art, poetry, and classes, as well as the magazine La Raíz. So do take a look at those links as well. But feel free to unmute. I see Rosemary, you've unmuted. Would you like to say something?
Oh, yes, sure. Elizabeth, your poetry is just wonderful. I went through the Chicano movement myself, and so I was a poet with many of the poets that were around at the time of Francisco Alarcón. I don't know if you've heard of him. I'm sure you have. He passed away not too many years ago, but he was a good friend of mine. And I'm so happy to see the younger generation, yourself, coming through with this wonderful voice and having spreading the culture so that people can be aware of it, and also to be aware of some of the problems, not the ignoring of the work of Latinos, and the importance of having things written in a bilingual way, with Spanish words, because some things you cannot express with English or in a translation. And so I applaud you for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosemary. Thank you for sharing that. And yeah, it's great to have, like poets like you mentioned, like Francisco Alarcón and all these writers that, that inspire or like in my case, like inspire me, or like, that I learn from, either about themes or just, like that energy of poetry. And yeah, it's like beautiful to be part of like continuing that tradition. Thank you.
Where can we see in San Francisco some of your paintings?
I have 3 paintings at Mission Cultural Center for the Latino Arts and MCCLA. It'll be there through the end of September.
Oh,
So not too long from now, but I have 3 paintings there that you can see. And I do also have in case anyone was wondering, I have 3 paintings up in San Jose right now at the School of Arts and Culture at the Mexican Heritage Plaza, which will also be there through the end of September, or through October 1st. So if you're interested in seeing some of the paintings from the first series that was shown, the Mexica dancer paintings, yeah, you can through and see those, and the information is on my social media and website, which I think Monica posted, but I'll reshare later. Thank you.
Yes, I have shared that information as well. And if some of you may not be aware, Elizabeth also does sculptures. So she also conducts alebrijes workshops and teaches alebrijes to young kids, I think, in several different libraries around the Bay Area. So do visit her website. It has always all the information and updates in there.
Yeah,
All
if
right.
anyone's near Livermore, I'm gonna do a series of alebrije sculpture workshops. They're free at the I think the Civic Center Library of the Livermore Public Library System. So I'm not that great at updating on my website, but it will go on there, and it's on my social media, Instagram and Facebook, which I'll note in the chat. Thank you for your question, and thank you, Monica.
Well, I'm sorry, I was muted. Well, I was just saying I'm grateful for your time and for your creative offerings. And it was a delight to have you as my featured artist. I hope you too enjoyed the evening and it brought you and your art new joy and inspiration, just as it did to all of us. So muchas gracias.
Gracias, Monica.
Well, I'll invite you at the end of our open mic segment for a closing poem. But for now, please enjoy the rest of your evening with our local poets on the mic. And with that, we are going to stop recording this segment. Those of you who are in the Zoom room, please stay online for the open mic segment of the evening. To our YouTube audience, thanks for joining in and hope to see you for next month's virtual Belmont Poetry Night. Good night.